That's right, it tis the season. Welcome back. Been a little bit. It has been incredibly busy for me. I know it's been busy for you. But we are at that wonderful time of year where things are slowing down, wrapping up, speeding up as we race to the January update. So you're going to take this time. I'm going to take this time and we are going to do a year in review here on Tyrants on the Field, looking at the entirety of the metadata that we have from Longshanks for the entirety of this calendar year. The data that I am looking at is current as of 12/27 or 12/17 when this is being recorded. We have 494 events that have results in place. We have over 9,305 games worth of data. So needless to say, really big show here to go over the data that we have. And we're going to talk through it because it is pretty interesting. And a couple of things to get started on. We're going to look at this a couple of different ways. We're going to look at this through the eyes of the Mark IV factions, because those factions have a majority of games played. Additionally, we have we'll look at a couple of outliers or the stronger games played for the Armies of Legend, which is, I believe, what their new term is going to be in the app for the old legacy stuff. So let's get into it. Let's talk through it. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be data-rific. And it's going to all be meaningless in January because change is a-coming, so they say. So let's get into it. Again, we have 494 events spanning 9,305 games. So let's talk about the most played faction. Per Longshanks data, the faction with the most games recorded is, drumroll please, Dusk House Callus, 2,379 games. 1,308 wins, 1,062 losses, 9 recorded draws per the data. A 55% win rate. Now, that win rate is not adjusted for Dusk on Dusk crime. Jumping into the caster data, the most played caster in Dusk, unsurprisingly, is Seraphel. Seraphel had 716 games played, 446 wins, 270 losses, 62% win rate. Moraine was the second most played with 373 games, 195 wins, 178 losses, 52% win rate. Tyrus was the third most played caster, 164 wins, 137 losses, 54% win rate. Helith comes in fourth with 282 games played, 148 wins, 132 losses, 2 recorded draws, 53% win rate. And then rounding it out with 128 games played, trying his best, your favorite and mine, Hazaroth, with 61 wins, 67 losses, 48% win rate. He tried. So, couple of interesting bits on Dusk House Callus, particularly because it is the faction that we just have the most data on, period. They have the most games played by almost 300 more games than the next faction. And they have played a majority of their games into the other Mark IV factions. So we kind of get a sense of where they kind of rack and stack, at least initially. The one outlier being Crix. Again, Crix has not been out from a ranked perspective all that long. Only 45 games recorded, but there Dusk has about a 58% win rate. I'm sure that's going to normalize a little bit more over the next year. We will see. But 178 games into Signar and a 58 or into Storm Legion Signar with a 58% win rate. 57% win rate into Brine Bloods, 267 games played. Then we get to Shadow Flame Shard, 246 games played against Shadow Flame Shard. Dusk winning 55% of those. 238 games of Dusk on Dusk crime for those that are interested in normalizing. 291 games into Khador, by far the most played of the Mark IV factions into Dusk is Khador. 50% win rate. That is a 50-50 game by the numbers. With a large enough size to be statistically significant. So that is a very interesting data point to me. Additional data point, 277 games into Orgoth. Dusk with only a 47% win rate into Orgoth on the year. And then none of the other factions got to 100 games played into Dusk. Grimkin had 62 games into Dusk, which is just about the largest. No, 86. Infernals had 86 games into Dusk. Dusk only had a 36% win rate. Dusk had a pretty significant deficiency into Infernals this year. They had a pretty significant advantage, a 56% win rate into Grimkin. On 62 games played, and then into Exalted Scorn. Dusk only had a 44% win rate, 52 games played there, but Dusk only winning 44% of the time. So one of the things that made some of these better Armies of Legend bits is they had a very good chance outside of Grimkin into Dusk at the general meta level compared to other things. And again, into the bulk of the Mark IV field, Dusk has over a 50% win rate. We get to Khador. It's a 50% win rate, so basically a coin toss with, again, 291 games played. And then into Orgoth, only a 47% win rate with 277 games played. So again, pretty significant data and pretty definitive data that I like quite a bit here. Another thing to note, of the games played, 1,879 were at 100 points. 75, there were only 322 games recorded on the year, with 6 at 25 and another 46 at 50. So from an overall sampling size, bulk of this data and the bulk of the weighting is most definitely at 100 points. So we get some good data integrity there. Interesting bits. Positive win rates across all of the scenarios. So Battle Alliance with a 54% win rate, Invasion 53% win rate, Payload 57% win rate, Recon Mark IV 58% win rate, Two Fronts 57% win rate, and Wolves That Are Heroes 54% win rate. Dusk had 851 games that ended in caster kill, with 54% of those going Dusk's way. On scenario, 1,066 games went scenario with 57% win rate to Dusk. So Dusk has done a very good job in the two main um, factors for winning the game. And then on Death Clock, 329 with 54% win rate. All right, so that's where we're at from a Dusk perspective. In the grand scheme of the game, they are the fourth best win rate overall. Top win rate in the game goes to Exalted this year. 401 games played, 246 wins, 155 losses, 61% win rate. Again, didn't quite get to the 500 games played threshold. Infernals and Grimkin both surpassed 500 games played. Exalted did not. But the win rate definitely there, and definitely there from a team tournament perspective. When we look back at the events throughout the year that were team-based, we saw Exalted Scorn do very well. So not a surprise here. Infernals in the number 2 spot, 60% win rate, 592 games, 352 wins, 235 losses. Infernals again getting a significant amount of wins into the Mark IV factions, being a real pain for kind of the Mark IV mechanics, and it's not surprising when you're able to summon in heavies. But just want to go into the numbers a little bit because they are pretty interesting. Again, Infernals with a 64% win rate into Dusk, a 59% win rate into Brine Bloods, a 55% win rate into into Wintercore, a 47% win rate into Orgoth. So again, more of a coin flippy game. This is where they make a lot of headway, and again, 64% win rate into or 65% win rate into Storm Legion, 69% win rate into Shadowflame Shard. So yeah, they feasted on the Mark IV factions, and were able to carve themselves quite a good tournament niche. And again, probably not likely to see extreme changes in January. So depending upon how the rest of the field falls, Infernals are probably still going to be a team to be reckoned with. Grimkin, again, 533 games played, 315 wins, 217 losses, 59% win rate. Let's go into kind of where those wins are coming from. I think, again, we're going to see kind of the standard tail of the tape on these factions that do well. 72% win rate into Shadowflame Shard, a 62% win rate into Storm Legion, 62% win rate into Orgoth, 60% win rate into Khador, 56% win rate into Brine Bloods, and a 44% win rate into Dusk. So Dusk really the only one of the Mark IV factions that has a positive win rate into Grimkin. On the whole of the year, again, with 9,305 games played, total with 533 of those being played by Grimkin. All right, let's talk about the Sea Raiders. Sea Raiders are the 5th best win percentage in the game. 2,074 games played, 1,130 wins, 940 losses, 4 recorded draws, 55% win rate. Breaking it down by caster, no surprise who the most played caster is. In Orgoth, with 771 games played, is Harusk, 451 wins, 320 losses, 58% win rate. Sabreth, firm number 2, 390 games played, 218 wins, 172 losses, 56% win rate. Oriak's in number 3 position, 174 games played, 85 up, 89 down, 49% win rate. Butcher coming in last with 60 wins or 60 games played, 28 wins, 32 losses, 47% win rate. Kishtar, 103 games played in tournament setting, 37 wins, 66 losses, 36% win rate. Clearly, Kishtar, the weakest of the Sea Raiders casters, at least currently. So let's get into the numbers. Let's see how Orgoth racked and stacked up its wins into the surrounding meta. With 142 games played into Signar, Storm Legion, 61% win rate for Orgoth. Definitely an area where Orgoth got to feast this year. 57% win rate into Winter Core, 225 games played. 277 games into Dusk, a 53% win rate for Orgoth there. 221 games into Shadowflame Shard, 52% win rate for Orgoth. A 51% win rate on 213 games played into Brine Bloods. 204 games into Orgoth itself, again 50-50 there. Real predators so far, Crix is definitely Necrofactorum is definitely emerging as a potential predator. 44% win rate, again only 45 games played, but from a trending standpoint, they are the one Mark IV faction where we do not have at least a 50-50, or a positive match, at least currently. Grimkin definitely beat up on Orgoth this year, only a 38% win rate for Orgoth on the 66 games played. Exalted also pretty good beating, only a 31% win rate for Orgoth, 45 games played. The crazy thing for Orgoth is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 factions had a greater or had a win rate over 50% into Orgoth. Orgoth was 50-50 or better into all but 5 armies. Which is a pretty impressive feat on the year in this much data with over 2,000 games played. Again, in terms of a breakdown of point size, 1,540 games were recorded at 100 points. 354 were played at 75, 58 at 50, and 5 at 225 points. With the 75 and 100 point win rates matching each other exactly at 55%. Battle lines, again, from a scenario standpoint, Orgoth was greater than 50% on each of the scenarios. Battle lines was a 54% win rate. Invasion a 60% win rate. Payload a 60% win rate. Recon Mark IV 53% win rate. Two fronts a 51% win rate, and Wolves at Our Heels a 53% win rate. Win condition, Castor kill 659 games, 45% win rate for Orgoth there. 253 games went to Deathclock, 60% win rate for Orgoth on Deathclock. And then on Scenario, 1,036 games went to Scenario Victory, 60% win rate for Orgoth there. Orgoth definitely dominant on the Scenario game, which is pretty impressive. All right. onwards and downwards. So, interestingly, Storm Knights at 194 games are the sixth place win rate, 53%, with 102 wins, 91 losses. Dark Operations, 445 games played, 228 wins, 215 losses, 2 draws, 51% win rate. Our next Mark IV Army, 375 games played, 189 wins, 184 losses, 2 draws, 51% win rate. Necrofactorum is starting to make a name for itself. Again, the sample size is incredibly small compared to the other Mark IV factions, but even in this smaller sample size, there's some pretty interesting data so far. One of the things that we see from Crix is positive win rates into all of the focus-based factions in Mark IV. We see a 56% win rate into Orgoth. We see a 54% win rate so far into Signar, but only 28 games there. So look for that one to probably move closer to 50%, particularly as Kane gets utilized more. A 50% win or a 54% win rate into Winter Core, 52 games played, and a 50% win rate into Shadowflame Shard. The primary outliers into Crix are Dusk and Winter Core. Or, sorry, Dusk and Brine Bloods. Dusk and Brine Bloods each with a 41% win rate, 46 games played for Brine Bloods, 45 games played for Dusk. And we're seeing win rate on Necrofactorum at only 41% on those two factions. So there's definitely some natural predators for what Crix is trying to do in the meta. I think the other factions are going to start to adapt a little bit better to Crix's game plan, get an understanding of what they're trying to do, and utilize the tools a bit better as they kind of go forward. I think Crix right now is built to kind of feast on how a lot of these lists were being built previously into the previous meta, and they're definitely going to be meta defining as we walk forward into 2025. So I think the early data is very interesting. One of the things that I am very very cautious about, especially as I've observed a lot of Crix games recently, is that is a faction that has a pretty decent skill cap on it, meaning there are a lot of things that are not representative of the actual power level on paper. A lot of the power level is derived from the interactions of the rules on the table between terrain, the opposing models, and kind of the stacking of the general abilities and the layering of said troops from a positional standpoint. And you can really up the power level of that faction um, with just some simple placement and layering techniques that are going to become more second nature as we move into next year, especially as people get more reps with the army and get more comfortable with what it does. Um, so I'm expecting this win rate to rise pretty significantly as we continue on into next year. Um, but it's not a bad win rate at all through the first 375 games for Necrofactorum. But I don't think it's a cause for major alarm, but I also would say it's not a cause for major relief either. I think we're definitely in a wait and see moment from a meta perspective, not only because of January coming, but just because of what Necrofactorum kind of represents from a philosophical list design standpoint. All right, Brine Blood Marauders, number 9, 50% win rate, the perfect ratio Um, they are a coin flip faction. Uh, 1,790 games played, 893 wins, 890 losses, 7 draws. Perfect 50% win rate. Let's talk about it by caster. Ragemonger, the toast of the town when it comes to games played, 401 games played, 195 wins, 206 losses, 49% win rate. Who would have thought a dice dependent feat caster would be 50%, would be just about 50% on the dice, uh, in terms of win rate. Totally shocks me. Second most played caster, Shadow Tongue, 356. I'm sorry, 357 games, 159 wins, 198 losses, 45% win rate. And then rounding it out in the top three is Thorga, 318 wins, 179 losses, 179 wins, 318 games, 179 wins, 139 losses, 56% win rate. Um, the data indicates you should be playing more Thorga as Thorga wins games. And Shadow Tongue and Ragemonger give you the opportunity to have a 50% win rate. Firequill, 71 games played, 24 wins, 47 losses, 34% win rate. Just not quite there, just not quite good enough. And then Bhagavavan, 50%, 50 games played, 22 wins, 28 losses, 54% win rate. I know a lot of people are starting to experiment with him as we get into the new year. I don't know quite what to make of him yet. I, I think the other three are just fundamentally better, but maybe there's a world where his kid is exactly what you need to play. I don't know. I've played against him, and he's definitely not a caster that I had any fear about playing. Just to respect for his threat range, and that was it. Where Shadow Tongue is a mind warp to play against, Thorga can be incredibly difficult to get through, and you're really reliant on your dice playing well. But let's talk about what Brine Bloods do incredibly well. Brine Bloods are great into Shadow Flame Shard. Undeniably great. 152 games played, 58% win rate for Brine Bloods into Shadow Flame Shard. 59% win rate into Crix, Necrofactorum, 46 with 46 games played. Brine Bloods pretty good into Storm Legion, 128 games played, 52% win rate. Into Orgoth, 49% win rate, 213 games played. Basically a coin flip. Not bad for the Bryans, and I would say that's definitely where we feel for the matchup on the Orgoth side of it. Definitely feels coin flippy. Um, all those games tend to be very close. They tend to go as sort of the dice go, regardless if they're playing Ragemonger or not. It's an interesting matchup. There's a lot of technical plays on both sides. Uh, can be a lot of fun. 47% win rate for Brine Bloods into Winter Core, 217 games played. So they start to struggle a little bit with the armor crack and the consistency. It's one of the things that Khador does exceedingly well. Additionally, the amount of volume fire that Khador has and can bring to the table just sort of plays into a lot of the weaknesses that Brian's have just generally. 44% win rate into Grimkin, 43% win rate into Dusk on 267 games played. Brian's just have a very rough time into Dusk. And again, a lot of that, I would be interested to see how many of these games, we don't have this data, but it'd be interesting to see how many of these games started to flip, or what the win rate was once there was more generalized access to the stone that gives the magical weapons. Because again, the the void spirits just very good into brine bloods, particularly before the introduction of the stone. So let's talk scenarios. Battle lines, 53% win rate. Invasion, 49% win rate. Payload, a 48% win rate. Recon Mark IV, 51% win rate. Two fronts, a 49% win rate. Wolves at our heels, 49% win rate. Caster Kill, 641 games, a 49% win rate on Caster Kill, 246 games to Deathclock, 50% win rate on Deathclock. Scenario, 789 games, 51% win rate on Scenario. So it's not surprising that a faction that has infantry that is sort of made of paper, but has tough checks, has sort of a 50% scenario win rate, just over 50% on scenario win rate. The the brines don't really have traditional troll staying power. They have very good heavies that can kind of stick around for a long time and can be built in that way. And that's sort of the way that they are built, is to maximize their ability to sort of stay around and then provide some late game output for the scenario. Their casters can be pretty active on scenario elements, um, and they have some of the best ambushing units in the game. But they just don't generally have the staying power outside of making their tough checks repeatedly. Uh, So not overly surprising that we see that. One very interesting data point here. 1,404 games played at 100 points, 49% win rate. 251 games played at 75 points, 56% win rate. So I think it's important to note here that this is almost a 7-point deviation in win rate by going down to 75 points. I think trolls really do well in a lower points environment because they kind of have some native advantages in general damage output compared to their peers. And at 100 points, the opponent can kind of keep up with them from a peace trade perspective. And trolls sort of have to be a little more creative in how they're trading out and making sure they're getting value. At 75, it's pretty easy for them to trade up fairly continually in the match and um, really own the field. And so that's why I'm thinking you're getting that 7% discrepancy. But it's interesting when you see those type of things where a faction seems way better at a certain points level compared to sort of our normative points level. So did just want to point that out. Onward to, drum roll, Storm Legion. Storm Legion with a 50% win rate. 1,299 games played, 644 wins, 652 losses, 3 draws. Caster-wise, big winner is Sparkhammer with 313 games played, 149 wins, 164 losses, 48% win rate. Next most played caster, Wolf, with 154 games, 88 wins, 66 losses, 57% win rate. Third most played caster, Calder, 60 wins, 89 losses, 40% win rate. Kane, rapidly becoming one of the top played casters, 97 games played, 46 wins, 51 losses, 47% win rate. DeBarro with 103 games, 53 wins, 50 losses, 51% win rate. Huxley with 85 games played, 45 wins, 40 losses, um, for a 53% win rate. Not surprising to me that Wolf still remains uh, sort of a top pair piece in Storm Legion. Uh, Also not surprising to me that he is the top win getter from a percentage standpoint. Uh, I think Sparkhammer came on the scene very, very hot and fast, and I do think most players were able to adapt to what Sparks does, get a game plan for him, and ultimately be able to rectify that matchup just through play. That does seem to be sort of the pattern with Storm Legion casters. Is they'll come onto the scene, they'll be very difficult initially. They'll rack up um, some very key wins into some factions, and then things will sort of normalize or shift as the meta adapts to them. Um, and I think it's just a function of the pieces that they have available to them when you are as reliant on single wound infantry as Storm Legion tends to be, and on sort of your caster to do a variety of things. It is very easy to have those win rates begin to slip over time, just because you don't have a lot of rules that are sort of saving you when you're just working off of generally raw stats to try and keep you upright as best you can. It's sort of the curse of Storm Legion in this edition. There's not really a spell that kind of bails them out. There's not really a wonder unit that kind of bails them out. It's a concert of things that has to go right for them to do exceedingly well. It's not a knock on the players of the faction. It's just sort of a reality of what Storm Legion is trying to do, and sort of the pieces that they have to work with. Now let's look at how they get to their win rates. 127 games into Shadow Flame Shard, 58% win rate for Storm Legion into Shadow Flame. Again, great guns, really good at knocking out high defense models. Uh, they are built to give Shadow Flame Shard a hard time. 52% win rate into Winter Core, 150 games. They are a very decent answer for Winter Core is trying to do. So again, not shocking there. Kind of two sides of the same coin with Khador and Signar. So having a slight edge over Winter Core, not surprising. 92 games into Storm Legion for a 50% win rate. Again, no surprise. They're 128 games into Brine Bloods, 48% win rate. So Brine's getting just a little bit of an edge over Signar. Um, Again, not overly surprising. This one is a little surprising, but we are early days. For only a 46% win rate right now for Storm Legion into Necrofactorum, but only 28 games played. So a lot more to be told here in this story. But at least in the early going, Necrofactorum has a better idea of how to beat Signar than Signar does how to beat Necrofactorum. But again, we're still very early days. Not early days here, 178 games into Dusk, only a 42% win rate for Storm Legion. Storm Legion does not have good answers into what Dusk is trying to do. Again, Dusk very efficient at killing single wound infantry, very efficient at killing specific targets. Uh, they they struggle into Storm Legion struggles into Dusk. Uh, Additional struggling with Orgoth. 39% win rate into Orgoth, 142 games. Orgoth has a majority of tools to make Signar's life significantly more difficult. Again, Orgoth pretty decent at annihilating Singlewood infantry. We have a bunch of tools to knock down Jax in the Wolf matchup, as well as RFP infantry, so that we don't proc the feat at all, giving them a non-feat, which really hampers their ability to succeed. And in the Spark Hammer matchup, we just have a general ability to outlast Sparky a majority of time, or to sort of set a line of battle that Signar has a pretty significant difficulty breaking. At least that's kind of been the story on them this year. Yeah, Storm Legion is in an odd spot when we look at them currently. I think there's a lot of hope with what's coming out. I think Kane revitalizes that faction in a lot of different ways. The Borealis, I think, brings a lot to the table in terms of just being a better Jack for that faction. But I don't know if it's enough to prop it up fully. The Maelstrom, I think, does do a lot for the faction. I am interested to see how it plays out on the table. I haven't had the chance to fight against one yet. Not saying I'm looking forward to it, but I'm sure I'm going to get to see it on the table and have to have some plans to mitigate it. In terms of scenario, 50% win rate on battle lines, 40% win rate on invasion, 57% win rate on payload, 44% win rate on recon Mark IV. Two fronts, 52% win rate, and wolves at our heels, a 55% win rate. So kind of up and down on the scenario. Interestingly, recon Mark IV, generally a more quote unquote dead scenario, seems to be the bugaboo for Storm Legion. That is an interesting data point on 228 games. That I've got to ponder some more as to why that is. In terms of overall win condition, 395 games with the caster kill, 54% win rate for Signar there. I'm sure that is going to go up with Kane now in the roster. 165 games on Deathclock, only a 44% win rate. If Signar goes long, Signar does not do well. That's what the story is there. Again, makes sense for a faction that is not sort of built out last year on the table. 49% win rate on scenario, 663 games went to scenario. So just a little under 50% on scenario game there. Again, not overly surprising. Very similar to the troll story. Continuing talking about the troll story and the Storm Legion story. 980 games at 100 points, 48% win rate. At 75, 191 games played, 57% win rate. So Storm Legion, again, gets significantly better in a smaller game. Again, in a smaller game, you've got a smaller dice sample size. Their stats have an ability to outlast. You have the ability for your sort of higher cost, better quality output models that you're paying for to do more work, get the strike out first, and then sort of take over the game. In a way you just can't do at 100 points because of some of the redundancy and the ability for your opponent to be on par with you in terms of elimination power. And ultimately, if you're par early with Signar, you're going to end up winning that game. If you are able to, if Signar is able to alpha effectively, Signar has a better chance to win that game because Signar is really good at playing from ahead. They are not good at catching up. It's just sort of the nature of how their stat lines work out. And so that's sort of the reason that you see them where they're at. But it is interesting to note that they are a 50% win rate faction on the whole. Again, on almost 1,300 games, just one shy of 1,300 games played. Now let's talk about Winter Core. 2,074 games played, 1,018 games won, 1,051 games lost, 5 games drawn, 49% win rate. So basically a 50% or just under 50% win rate on the whole. But let's get into the casters and let's talk about what we're kind of seeing here. Because really, Winter Core is sort of a tale of two factions. As odd as that sounds, but there's really the early part of the year where the Mastodon did not exist, and then there's the part of the year where the Mastodon does exist. And Khador is kind of a very different animal post Mastodon than it was pre Mastodon. And we'll talk about that a little bit here because it is very reflective in the data. So let's talk about Baranova. Baranova's most played caster, 525 games, 268 wins, 257 losses, 51% win rate. I'm a firm believer that if this data was just purely Mastodon forward, this would be an over 50% win rate in Baranova's favor. Baranova was kind of the caster you had to play previously because her feat is just one of the best control feats possible, but she didn't have sort of a reliable brick to stand in front of her and keep her from dying. She's a 15-15, so things just kind of die. When Mastodon came around, Mastodon solved a lot of the issues that she had, particularly in being survivable, in that you don't have a lot of great outs into Baranova if you can't see her and you can't kind of shove something into her or get your planes easily around her to kind of spray her down. Mastodon helps with all of those things. So I do think that the win rate here is a little less genuine because of that portion of the data where we had no Mastodon. But Baranova was still being played very heavily. But again, with 51% win rate, not anything to be sad about, but I don't think this is reflective of where they're actually at from a meta perspective, at least today. 445 games for Savrin, second most played caster, 247 wins, 198 losses, 56% win rate. Again, data indicates you should be playing more Savrin, which is, again, not surprising. An amazing feat, amazing spell list, ability to kind of crank the Jax or the Mastodon, whichever way you kind of build it out, to 11. Just because of the spell suite, kill order, and again, that feat is just murders a lot of things. Sakura third most played with 240 wins, 110 wins, 130 losses, 240 games played, 46% win rate. Sakura kind of suffers from the fact that she really wants Mana Wars. There are really suppressors, and then you can take Wrecking Crew, and Wrecking Crew is just not what Wrecking Crew should be. And so I think it drags down the list pretty significantly in terms of win rate from where it could be. Then we have Borashek, 140 games played, 52 wins, 87 losses, 1 draw, 38% win rate. Again, kind of a mixed bag with Borashek. He dies a lot. He could be a lot better if he had some more tools. I'm interested to see what, if anything, is done with him in January. Then we got Kovacic, 97 games played, 42 wins, 55 losses. I think people are still trying to figure out where that caster fits. And then the new kid on the block, Velcool, Captain Z, as she's affectionately known, 43 games played, 23 wins, 20 losses, 53% win rate. I think Velcool is going to be one to watch in the upcoming meta. Uh, just a phenomenal caster, very fun, different way to play Winter Core. I think it opens up your pairings quite a bit. I think you'll see Baronova fall off a little bit um, because Velcool just is so different and so interesting to play. That I think that is going to be who you end up pairing with Savron, and then it's a real question of whether you go Savron or whether you go Baronova in the Velcool pairing. And maybe we're all wrong, and maybe it is Sakura. Somebody figures out how to kind of make her sing in the upcoming meta, but I don't know if that's the case. So let's jump into where Winter Core is getting its wins from, and talk through any other interesting statistical bits for them. 217 games into Brian Blood's 53% win rate. 291 games at a Dusk, 50% win rate. 170 games into themselves for, again, a 50% win rate. Their ability to play the Dusk matchup at a coin flip level is very impressive this edition. I think it really speaks to the value of Winter Core. In this edition, it speaks to the value of armor, and I think it really speaks to Dust's ability to get through armor, but with some caveats. So it makes for a very interesting back and forth game. 48% win rate into Storm Legion, 150 games played. 46% win rate currently in a Necrofactorum. Again, only 52 games there. So not horrific, but I think that win rate is going to increase for Necrofactorum as we go forward. 46% win rate on 190 games into Shadowflame Shards. Shadowflame Shard getting a slight besting of Winter Core in a lot of these matchups. Again, if Shadowflame Shard can get to the casters in Winter Core just don't hold up to what is an assassination specialist faction. So again, not overly surprising that there'd be a slight edge for Shadowflame into Winter Core. Additionally, Winter Core very good at buffing one or two things up to a very high amount of armor. And Shadowflame Shard very good at knocking down something that's been buffed to a very high armor point. Into Orgoth, 225 games played, only a 43% win rate for Winter Core. Again, Winter Core kind of struggles a bit into the Orgoth matchup, although that is starting to normalize slightly with some of the newer casters that they have access to and sort of doing some rearranging of the game plan, but still, when you're a medium shooting faction and the opposing faction is really good at defeating medium range shooting, namely with Windstorm, and denying your ability to maximize damage, it tends to not go great for you. And so hence why there's an edge to Orgoth in the Winter Core matchup. From a scenario standpoint, 50% win rate on battle lines, 46% win rate on invasion, 51% win rate on payload, 49% win rate on Recon Mark IV, 50% win rate on two fronts, 47% win rate at wolves that are heals. From a caster kill perspective, 763 games played that went to caster kill, 49% win rate, 235 games played that went to deathclock, 49% win rate. And scenario, 940 games played, 48% win rate. So again, a faction that struggles a little bit scenario-wise compared to some of these other factions. But again, some interesting data points. At 100 points played, there were 1,624 games, 49% win rate. At 75 points, 277 games played, 48% win rate. Um, Kador is very consistent regardless of what point level they're playing at. In terms of win rate, we don't see a significant kind of drop off in the two main game modes compared to the last two factions that we kind of looked at. So just an interesting little bit of data there. All right, on to Shadowflame Shard. Shadowflame Shard at a 48% win rate, 1,607 games played, 773 wins, 832 losses, 2 draws. Let's talk casters. Primary caster for the faction is Shyrus, 518 games, 228 wins, 290 losses, 44% win rate. Then we get to Kyrax, 277 games played, 166 wins, 111 losses, 60% win rate. Rassic, 232 games played, 106 wins, 126 losses, 46% win rate. And Nixian, bringing up the rear with 74 games played, 32 wins, 42 losses, 43% win rate. Let's talk about Bruno. And by that I mean Shyrus. Shyrus is sort of forced as the match into a lot of the Mark IV factions, particularly based on their list pairing, because Kyrax or Rassic, depending on who you're pairing them with, just can have some struggles into one portion of that matchup, and so Shyrus is often dropped. This means that Shyrus gets placed in a lot of matches where ideally she would not be being played, but she has to be played because the other side of that matchup is just worse. Um, she can also just die randomly again because her armor is so atrocious. Very good, very good feat, but not an undefeatable feat by any means in terms of control. Very dice dependent in certain places. A good caster, but a caster that has a lot of things that can go wrong for her. And if you don't play her absolutely precise in the moment, she will absolutely die on you. So let's get into sort of how we derive our general win rate from a games perspective. 190 games into Winter Core, 54% win rate for Shadowflame Shard. Again, 100 games into ourselves, 50% win rate. 50% win rate into Necrofactorum, but again, only 36 games played. But so far, that is a pretty interesting matchup that is seeming to be fairly even. Um, which again makes sense in my mind just based on the tools that Necrofactorum have and the general out threading that Shadowflame Shard brings to the table, as well as some ability to kind of negate some of the strengths of Shadowflame Shard, or some of the strengths of Necrofactorum. Again, interesting tactical match. 48% win rate into Orgoth, 221 games played. So Orgoth slightly better in that matchup, but still pretty interesting from a technical standpoint. 45% win rate into Dusk, 246 games played. Again, Dusk really owning this matchup and making it difficult for Shadowflame Shard. Um, this is an area where we've lost a lot of games that we wish we hadn't. Again, being undead into our faction is really eliminates a lot of tech that we kind of bring to help keep our stuff alive. Um, but it's based on our opponent being living minimally, and them being mostly non-living. Mostly undead, create some issues for us, as well as the access to some of the spells that they have. Uh, Makes it a little more difficult matchup for Shadowflame Shard. A 42% win rate into Storm Legion, 127 games played. Again, Storm Legion brings some of the best guns in the game to bear on us. We don't like guns. Um, they hurt, and it causes us some issues. Uh, Similarly, 152 games into Brian Bloods with Shadowflame Shard only winning 42% of those matches. The Brian's match is very difficult at points for Shadowflame Shard. It is really about who goes first, and if Shadowflame Shard can take table space, it becomes a more interesting game. But the general output of the Brine Bloods into our units and into our beasts just sort of makes this matchup an uphill battle for Shadowflame. And when I kind of get deeper in, I want to get a little deeper into the Brine Bloods match. Oddly enough, it is only a small sample, only 8 games, but Nixian has a 75% win rate into Brine Bloods, and that does not surprise me, um, based on what Nixian is able to do compared to the other casters in the Brine's Blood match is mostly she can't be knocked down. Her feat does a lot into Brine Bloods. And she can engineer assassinations a little bit better than the rest of her ilk can, outside of Shyrus. And Shyrus suffers from the fact that in that matchup, the Brig can be a death knell for her. As it just runs up close, ignores the stealth, and goes to Rad 8 and shoots her with a knockdown gun. Two chances at a knockdown, and as soon as Cyrus is knocked down, the rest of the army just takes her out. So yeah, it's one of those instances. Um, Interestingly, into the Shadow Tongue matchup, it's 50-50 game, 49% win rate for Shadow Flame Shard on 39 games played. Into Ragemonger, we have a slight edge, 29 games played there. We have 52% win rate. Into Thorga, we absolutely blow 37% win rate on 28 games played. Again, not overly surprising there. Thorga kind of does everything that we don't want to see for our army. Let's talk scenario. 49% on battle lines, 51% on invasion, 43% on payload, 53% on recon Mark IV, 44% on two fronts, 51% on wolves at our heels. Two fronts actively goes against everything our faction stands for because all of our casters are control 12. So having to be as spread as you need to be on two fronts just means our caster has to be on one side of the board or the other and cannot offer support to the other side. Again, the majority of our casters being Fury 6 also negatively impacts our ability to effectively cycle. Unsurprisingly, win condition, caster kill, 687 games went to assassination, 55% win rate for Shadow Flame Shard. This is what Shadow Flame Shard does. We are an assassination faction, and the numbers bear this out. Deathclock, 179 games, 50% win rate. We do make you think quite a bit. So 50-50 there. On scenario, 645 games, so almost 42 games fewer, decided by scenario than on caster kill, and a 42% win rate. So for those counting at home, that is a 13% difference in win rate if you go to scenario versus cast or kill with Shadowflame Shard. This is an assassination faction. The numbers bear this out currently. Now I don't know with January if that changes. I would say flavor-wise, we're definitely meant to be assassination based. But our scenario game is very weak. Part of this is we have very expensive solos, so it makes a lot of the work solos just aren't taken because they're so expensive in our faction comparatively to other factions, and that hampers our ability on scenario. Our infantry again doesn't have great staying power. It has very good output, but it doesn't have great staying power. So in an attritional based game, we have a tendency to suffer because yeah, we can get a lot of work done, but you can get more work done on us with fewer pieces than we can in many instances from a Shadowflame Shard standpoint. Uh, Point size wise, very interesting one here. At 100 points, we have 1,198 games played, 49% win rate. At 75, 273 games played, 44% win rate. A 5% drop in efficiency for going down 25 points. Again, speaks to Shadowflame Shard's overcosted nature in terms of what it has to bring to the table to be effective. The fact that its solos are so expensive, all of these things factor in to your ability to play at the lower points level, and it directly affects our win rate. And it's evident here in the large numbers. So pretty interesting bit of technical data here. That's very exciting. Honorable mention to Dark Host. Crix's Dark Host, 489 games played this year, 232 wins, 256 losses, 48% win rate. Best, good for 18th Army overall. It's not bad. It is almost 500 games played, which is why I want to call it out because that is a fairly significant statistical sample in the Armies of Legend portion of the field. Also, we'll talk real quickly about Final Interdiction. Protectorate Final Interdiction, 258 games played, 116 wins, 139 losses, 3 draws, 46% win rate, good for 21st overall. On the Final Interdiction side. So Protectorate, not in an amazing spot, but is just something to think about while we wander through the rest of the data here. So again, our 36th army, last army is in terms of win rate, 29%, 101 games played, 29 wins, 72 losses. Legion of Dawn. Retribution's Legion of Dawn is not in a great spot. Very similarly to the Temple Guardians. Temple Guardians, 110 games played, 35 wins, 75 losses, 32% win rate. So really the Armies of Legend outside of, again, your Infernals of the world, your Exalted, and your Grimkin, and your Storm Knights, your Dark Ops, you're not in great shakes, and you don't have a lot of statistically significant sample sizes to kind of talk about and draw from. Dark Host,
interesting again with almost 500 games played and almost a 50% win rate. Um, Darko seems to be a point where we got some things right, from a how do you keep an army of legend viable. Turns out you make them cricks, and you just let them cricks harder. That tends to solve a lot of problems for you. But yeah, that's our year in review. Uh, it was uh, it was a great year. Personally, I did not get to play as many games as I would have liked to. I did not perform as well as I would like to, and I didn't get out to as many events as I wanted to, um, due to various family commitments and such. Next year, hoping to get out to more events, get some actual travel in, um, get to a couple of conventions hopefully, and have some fun and see what I'm playing. Probably going to be Shadow Flame Shard. Might still be Orgoth. I don't know. Depends how January shakes out. I'm excited for January. I don't think it's going to be the end all be all. I also don't think it's going to be the end of the world. I think what it is I need a little bit of a change and a little bit of a break from what I've been playing. The Shadow Flame Shard is very interesting to me. I enjoyed the break that I had a little bit this year playing them early, and working a few tournaments with them. But I want to do some more with that faction. I think they are incredibly interesting, and they fit my aggressive nature a little bit better than Orgoth does at times. But Orgoth is always home, and I'm sure at some point this year I'll be back to them. It's just sort of what I do. But I got to wander a little bit. I hope all of you are well. I hope that the holidays go well for you, uh, and that next year we are refreshed, rejuvenated, and the game gets even bigger and better than it is right now. Uh, and that January really gives us what we want in terms of general game balance and an ability for a majority of armies to have games into each other. I think Mark IV is in a great spot. I think this year, despite being dominated by a couple of grand meta pieces in terms of like the pig and the Orgoth balloon being sort of a dominant piece and really shaping the meta. Even with those things in place, I think it was a very interesting and fairly balanced meta, at least at the top end. And as we kind of went through the numbers, it sort of bears that out. The Steamroller packet was very interesting this year. I think there are a lot of things that it did very well, and a lot of things that it has a lot of room for improvement on. Mainly cognitive load. I think a lot of the pain points for the packet, particularly for myself, is I'm still trying to remember what all of the elements do in a particular scenario each time I play it, because there's no templating and consistency in the element itself. I don't have something that I can easily reference in this scenario that says, "Oh, this is X objective. It does this time versus it does this other time," and I can get it consistent and I can remember to move battle lines. I can tell you battle lines at my table. It's 50-50 whether I've moved a thing or not, and my opponent is sort of the same way. Um, But in Wolves in Our Hills, I never forget because it has that jackpot mechanic. So I think there are things that can be done in a new packet, a refinement of this packet to make it even better. And again, we're still learning. We're still learning how the new steamroller works, and they're figuring out sort of that design space and what works and what doesn't. And I'm sure this refinement will be better than the previous one, and we will continue. They will continue to iterate, continue to make it better, and make it interesting. But one of the things I do want to say is I think that one of the things that I appreciate about this steamroller packet, in particular, is that I have never felt like, even when I've played a matchup um, on the same scenario, it has never felt like I am playing the exact same scenario. And part of the brilliance of that is particularly in the scenarios that have flag elements. Uh, because you select a terrain piece within 5, the table that you are on and the side of table that you have selected or been given, and the placement of the elements within 5 of where that objective lands radically changes that scenario, whether it be recon or battle lines. Again, any of the ones with flags, um, it dramatically changes sort of how that battle plays, what the value of certain pieces are, what the value of ambush is in a particular matchup or not, the value of being able to play wide, the value of having to play stacked. Uh, it really makes the battlefield dynamic and interesting and makes that scenario dynamic and interesting. Even if you're playing the same opponent, the matchup has similar beats, but the scenario doesn't quite. It changes sort of how the ebb and flow goes, and it changes the relative value of pieces within that matchup with something as simple as the table being slightly different. Um, I challenge you to think about this as you go into your next games this week, um, and think about how that is kind of affecting your play, and how you can utilize that knowledge to get a little better uh, at recognizing what that scenario flag placement is sort of doing, and if your matchups have felt similar or they felt slightly different within the scenario, and whether you like that or not. I'm one that does like it. I think it keeps the scenarios very dynamic, very fresh, but it also feels like I haven't mastered these scenarios nearly as well as I've mastered previous Steamroller packets. And I think that that is ultimately a good thing when you're playing a packet for a year. Um, I think I would rather be in a situation where I don't feel that I've mastered um, the scenarios. I want to be in a position where I understand the scenarios. I feel like I understand them. I want to state that fully. But I don't feel like you have an ability to really master them this this iteration of the Steamroller packet because they are so table dependent, and the nature of the table influences matchup much more than it has in previous editions of War Machine, just because of the interaction of the scenario on the tables themselves. Because again, anytime you have terrain becoming an objective, it changes the nature of that battlefield significantly. And again, changes the relative value of pieces and changes the relative value of side as well. So just a thought that I've had and something I've been thinking about, um, and and a piece of design thought that has kind of struck me this week. So I wanted to share it with you. Love to hear from you. Hit me up on the Discord. Hit me up on email, or leave me a message, comment on this or the YouTubes. Please check us out on YouTube. We are doing a weekly broadcast from the North American War Machine War Table League. We're doing a feature match each week. Myself and some special guests, including Eric Akers and Nate from St. Louis, uh, have been getting together and been broadcasting some games that we are doing on the YouTube, and then uploading the video to YouTube after as well. You can come do our watch party with us in the tried and true Delaware War Machine uh, area, and please come join our league. It's a ton of fun. We have 39 members in our December league. The January league will be coming out here, and we will be launching on the 13th. Um, let's go in on the 13th. We get your matchups on the 13th, and if the um, January update hasn't launched by then on the 13th, when it does launch, we will give you a chance to update your list. So don't feel sad. Don't feel bad. Um, If it doesn't come before our league starts, we will give you a chance once it does come to go ahead and correct once the update has actually dropped. So, going to be a ton of fun. Looking forward to it. Thanks again for listening. And remember, if you have tyrants, we're on the field.